Hello and welcome to the second series of In the Spotlight with Quocirca, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. I'm Luella Fernandez, Director of Quocirca, and today I'm joined by Todd Croteau, President of All Covered and Global Lead for IT Services at Konica Minolta. So welcome, Todd, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Luella. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about all things IT services, and it's interesting because a lot of Quocirca research has consistently showed that IT decision makers are really valuing IT-centric expertise from their MPS providers. And I think Konica Minolta really started addressing this need for IT services capabilities back in 2010 when it acquired All Covered. So it'd be great to hear about your journey with Konica Minolta and also your background with All Covered prior to the acquisition.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So, where to start? I had this is my second career. Back in 1997, I joined a partner. We had a small IT services business based in Boston, Massachusetts. We sold that to a company called All Bases Covered in 2000. And for the next 10 years, I did pretty much everything there, ending up being CEO. And at the end of 2010, we sold to Konica Minolta. It was a good fit at that time for a lot of different reasons. I felt really bullish on it. At the time, All Covered was 40 million, 350 employees, 20 locations, pretty much squarely in SMB. When I say SMB there, I mean under 100 employees. And you say 2010, it's over a decade. And I can't believe it in the sense that it's definitely been the fastest 10 years. It's been exciting. It's exceeded my expectations in terms of the exposure, the opportunity, the learning, my own personal growth, but I also think the growth of the business and the employees. In the US now, if you add it all up, it's probably closer to $350 million of revenue, 1,200 employees, 5,000 plus customers of all different shapes, sizes, lots of expertise in different areas. The portfolio has really expanded. So it's been a great ride. Now, what have we done? What's happened with that? We spent a lot of time focusing on the two channels. So two channels meaning our direct channel. So All Covered we've maintained the presence, the website, but it's since the first year, all of our paychecks have said Konica Minolta. So we operate as a division, not a subsidiary, but to have the best web presence. From my perspective, not to have a copier show up on the front page, right? We've kept the All Covered brand, so customers can see exactly what we can do. Employees can see future employees can see what we do. But with both channels, direct and dealer, on the direct side, we spent a lot of time educating, teaching, trying to find the best sales model to not overwhelm a traditional MFP rep. And so where we've ended up is with basically having them be confident enough to ask a few questions to generate a lead, right? And then get full compensation and recognition for that original lead. And the subject matter expert will come in, whether it's IT services, cloud services, voice services, whatever expertise is needed, and then handle the transaction from that initial interest to closing because they have the subject matter expertise. They can explain the value. But the MFP rep on the direct side will get full credit for that, including board, including trip, all of these things that matter on that side. And now we're up to last year, over 50% of those sales reps having a successful win, at least one, right? So I say that's pretty good accomplishment. On the dealer side, about half of the K of dealers in the US utilize All Covered services in some way, shape, or form, right? So some have already invested in the same manner in their own IT services, but they rarely do they have the full depth and breadth that we have or the experience we have. So there's ways we find sort of boutique or unique value to them. Now there's your traditional, maybe small business dealer, 20 to 50 employees, and there we're doing everything for them, right? To their customers. We act on their behalf. It's their customer. We're just providing the services to them. And then we also have a unified communications offering. That's actually been the most successful with the dealers. And I think that's because it's like the cleanest. It's a, really almost SKU-based service that they can then sell. And then that's done very well with the dealers as well. Turnkey solution, immediately all of their customers are going to be buying this from someone, so why not buy it from them? So that's a lot to unpack, Luella, but it's been a very exciting 10 years. The things that have changed the most have been the portfolio, the depth of the portfolio. And then for me personally, this past year, spending time on the global level and, seeing, meeting virtually, obviously, people all over the globe. When they asked me to do some global duties, I was looking forward to travel. There's been zero travel, so it's all been Zoom. But I have, hundreds of people I've met across the globe. And we're trying to find the best way to have both local intimacy with the customers, but at the same time, leverage knowledge across the globe.
Yeah, and I know one part of your role is to advance Konica Minolta's strategy in Europe in terms of IT services. And, I guess it's organizationally more complicated than in the US due to the diversity of regions and so on. Have you got any insight into how Europe is different to the US and what your approach is in the European market?
Yeah, lots of insights, lots of discovery. I think there's the obvious challenge of languages, right? From an American perspective, the obvious challenges of GDPR, right? I also think that the marketplace, depending on where you are in Europe, isn't the same marketplace as in the US. And what I mean by that is managed services is sort of a mainstay, certainly in the SMB space in the US. I haven't yet seen it that it's as mature yet inside of Europe, but I do think it will be for reasons that we'll talk about on this call. And so trying to find the right way to have centralized services, if that makes sense, that can scale across the European countries, 30 so countries that we service, but do it in such a way that, you handle language, you handle diversity, you handle the complexities associated with Europe. And I think we've made a lot of progress there. We have a good strategy in place. Obviously, I think first level support has to be in country because of the language more than anything. But then the things above that, installing a Cisco server, configuring a Cisco server, that could be done by someone sitting anywhere in Europe for anyone in Europe, as an example, right? So it's I think the other thing with Konica Minolta is our strategies have been sort of different between the U.S. and Europe. In the U.S., a lot of the investment has been on IT managed services or some investment in what we call ECM. In Europe, it's been in different areas. So investments have been made in Microsoft, Dynamics, and CRM, in some basic IT services, in some ECM, but not a cohesive strategy. So it's sort of have and have nots, if you will. So how do we have everyone have the same opportunity to bring the same value to their local customers?
Yeah, and I think you sort of mentioned that you're very much targeted at the SMB market, and we see in terms of managed services take up generally is that I think as a result of the pandemic, large enterprises have sort of seen that their IT teams have been really pressurized to support this kind of new remote landscape and have turned to managed services as a result. And that's, built interest around cloud hosting and infrastructure hosting and so on. But at the same time, SMBs don't, traditionally have the resources to manage their IT environments. So I'm just curious as to what you see as the key SMB priorities around that. And again, whether you're seeing differences in demand from SMBs in the US versus Europe.
So I think the differences are getting smaller now because of this pandemic, and everyone's in the same situation, right? And but you said it, resources, right? It's very difficult for SMB, and I think we should define, okay, what's an SMB, right? Because depending on which manufacturer or which cloud-based company I talk to, SMB is, some say below 1,000, right? Some say below 500. Having spent 30 years working with SMBs, there's a clear difference between the below 10, the 10 to 20, the 20 to 100, the 100, 500. They each, you get these layers of maturity, these layers of leadership. But in the smallest of SMBs, there's limited resources, both in terms of their ability to hire and retain, attract people to do these services, but also how much of their spend can they put towards it, right? So for every dollar they're going to spend, how do they get the biggest, best impact for that? Is it in cloud? Is it in security? Is it in productivity? And it kind of depends where they are and what industry they're in, and how concerned they are about different types of disruptions or threats. I do think that two areas that have emerged more so recently are the customer experience. So in this now digital world, they had a certain way that they were set up to handle their customers pre-pandemic, work from home. Now everyone's at home, depending on the business. Some will come back, some won't. But how do you optimize that customer's experience? How digital are you? What processes? Did you have everyone in a room and all the calls came in? And now how do you handle that? And so that the customer's experience is as good, if not better, right? And so investments in digital areas for the customer, and then I think also investments in digital experience for the employees. So much people didn't have people set up to work from home. So, initially it's the firefight of how do we get everyone to work? But now it's like, okay, are we going to provide standing desks? Are we going to provide headsets? What are we going to do for the employee's experience? And that can be both the equipment, but also what internal systems did we have before, where you could just walk down the hall and talk to HR, versus now, how do you handle that? How do you do coaching sessions? How do you, all of these things are different. So, how do you spend those limited dollars to have the biggest impact on your situation? That's where we try to help.
Yeah, and I know you're a sort of strong advocate of, being customer centric, and I think in this, very traditional print industry, it's been very much, obviously it's a legacy industry based on product first kind of strategies, and I know that with IT services, like you mentioned, it tends to be more focused on business outcomes. So how is that helping them, businesses, whether it's a small SMB or a larger SMB, achieve reduce costs, improve efficiencies, even sustainability. So are you seeing more demand from SMBs around those kind of areas, and they're looking more at business outcomes? And as you say, the customer experience you mentioned. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there's no real secret sauce I can share here. It's pretty consistent, less spending on your traditional infrastructure items, more spending on all things cloud, whether that's the workspace, 365 or Google Workspace, the SaaS platforms that people want to use, Salesforce or different CRM tools, and then just cloud-based, cloud-centric spending in both response to a lot of different items right now. One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about, in fact, I incorporated it into we're now, one of the things I'm trying to do globally is have these global community meetings, and we're spotlighting a different country every month. And in that, one of the items is customer success stories, right? So it's important to talk about a customer success, like walk us through the movie trailer version of the customers, what we did for them. So I actually called it Todd's favorite questions, right? So there's 3 questions I ask. So the first question is, who is the customer? And the name to some extent is not important, right? It's who are they? Like what industry? How many employees? What country? How many offices? What vertical? All these different things that give the character of it, right? If I was to describe you, right, I could do it in 5 different things that would describe you. So then the next question is, what was their problem or their challenge or their opportunity? How rich was our understanding of those success criteria, the ways that we could help them achieve it? And then the last question is, how do we do it? So who is the customer? What was their challenge, problem, opportunity? And then how do we solve it better than anyone else? And it's great storytelling. And I would encourage all of your listeners to sort of adopt a similar approach as you try to shift from sort of product out to customer in, because understanding how you help the customer is so important to having a customer-centric culture, right? And once most salespeople, if they hear a story, they can replicate that story. Right?
Yeah, it's having that empathy with the customer and being able to engage on that level. And I think, that's really interesting, because I think, like you say, it's very different from the product-centric approach from traditional print manufacturers. Have you seen that's required a lot of training for the traditional dealers that Konica Minolta works with? Is that something you're specifically focusing on the MPS side as well, or do they have kind of a whole tool set for both MPS and IT services?
Yeah, a lot of training. It's this. Some of your viewers might say this is an unfair comment, but On the traditional print side, the hard part, if you will, is getting the sale and then installing the device. And then if you got good quality products and you do some maintenance service on them, they run and there's not a lot of disruptions or issues. On the IT services side, it's inevitably a journey. And ironically, the easiest part is getting the signature. And from that point on, it's go, and it's whatever happens, with the support of that customer. With did they live in Houston and have a once in a century, freezing and everything froze and pipes burst, and okay, how do we help them? Or did they have an employee click on something they shouldn't have clicked on? Or did they just get bought by someone? Or so there's just constant dynamic situation that customer success is really starts once you have actually in the sales process, but then it's a lot of interaction with the customer from that point on, big or small, complex or simple, because everyone is using the IT every day and there's just so many variables. So that is probably scary to a lot of traditional product out companies. But in all of that craziness is a tremendous amount of value, a tremendous amount of intimacy, a tremendous amount of strategic discussions that happen with a customer. And you don't always get, it's harder to get that with just a product sale, right? Because how do you provide that additional value that someone's looking for, right?
Yeah, and it's very much looking beyond that commodity of print and building value-added services beyond that, which I think NPS has always been targeted at doing that. But I think there's, opportunities now, like you say, beyond that. And that kind of leads on quite nicely to question around security, because Quocirca is always recommending that NPS providers really lead with security as part of their offerings. And I'm just interested to know, from a managed IT services perspective, what kind of security support you offer, and how easy is it for NPS providers to link into those kind of service offerings, due to ransomware and supply chain attacks, and really, what would they be looking for in terms of those security services from an IT services provider?
Kind of a couple of answers to it. If you own the infrastructure support, you can obviously be more accountable to the full hardening of the customer's situation. If you're just providing the security, then you have to make sure you have sort of clear lines of demarcation in terms of who's responsible for what. But what I would say is that the things that can be done sort of fall into three different areas. So there's the biggest area, really, in my opinion, especially with the work from home, is just what is the employee's awareness? What is the employee's readiness? If they were to receive an email that looked legit, how discerning are they on clicking on something or responding to something? And I mean, I could tell you stories of all the things that happen you can imagine. We've had customers who have been hit by ransomware because of an employee action, only 2 weeks late to be hit again because of another employee's action. So on that front, education of the employees, there's lots of training that you can purchase, but then there's also training or testing around phishing, where you actually will engage with someone to intentionally try to target your employees, intentionally try to get them to click on something. It doesn't do any harm, but it does tell you, oh, geez, half of my employees clicked on a link they shouldn't have clicked on. More training is required, right? So I like to call it hygiene, right? We all know we should brush our teeth or we're going to end up at the dentist and whatnot. So, but the discipline around that, the discerning nature of that, I don't think enough people have enough awareness of right now, right? And it's not just email now. Now you're getting stuff on your text, right? You've got this big thing with Apple, right, related to it. So this awareness of the threat, ever present threat. The next thing is penetration testing or offensive testing. So, you could spend a lot of money on defensive security, but for the customer's perspective, what are my top 5 biggest holes? Is my front door open? Is my back window open? Like, what are the big things I can fix right now? And then you move into the security services, which can be anything from how do you harden a desktop, right, to how do you track and monitor any security events. The challenge on the security side is that they get expensive quickly, So depending on the customer you're talking to and depending on how deep their pocket is, will determine how far you can go, right? The way to get around that is to make sure, again, your end users are as trained as they can be, your infrastructure is as hardened as it can be, and you have a good backup, however you choose to do that, right? So if something happens, you're okay. For the, I think this is where it's will be difficult for business, for people to hire, train, and develop security people because they are probably in the highest demand of any group. So you're going to have to find, I would say most of your listeners are going to have to find a partner company where they have synergies, right? Or they, decide to invest in it, right?
Yeah, that's just what I was going to ask you really is, in terms of the security landscape and helping, customers build, I guess it's cyber resilience. So like you say, it's not just detecting and preventing, but also that ongoing remediation and how do you recover from, potential security breach. What would you recommend for, a typical MPS provider that's looking to get into managed IT services or managed security services? Would it be to build that talent internally, or is it better to partner with existing MSSPs that have that expertise? What are you seeing that's happening in the market already?
Yeah, I think people are doing all three. I think that there are challenges with all three, right? Trade-offs with all three. If you can afford to invest in it and you can take a long-term strategy and you can retain those people, obviously you have full control of the customer then, right? With the other scenarios, you're either using a platform, right, or you're using a partner, and then you just have to make sure that you're comfortable with the contractual arrangement and who's responsible for what, right? The one of the things that we were able to do in our we have several packaged offerings, and one of the packages actually includes cybersecurity insurance as part of the monthly fee, and it's above and beyond and additive to any additional policy that the customer may have themselves. But it's just that extra piece of security, because I think unfortunately, when it comes to cybersecurity, the attackers have the advantage. So I think most people know a business associate who's had some sort of ransomware, or it doesn't have to be just the big companies that we read about. And so it's what can you do also to protect your business? And so if you have some of these capabilities, you could consider, can you provide additional value-based services to the customer as well?
Yeah. So do you think for, in terms of the whole landscape for managed services, do you think it's easier for a managed IT service provider to move into offering print, or for a managed print service provider to move the other way? Or it's, I think there's been a lot of resistance amongst traditional MPS providers to maybe move into IT services because, perhaps they don't see the immediate return on investment. And it's also, requires a lot of investment, like you say, in terms of training. It'd be quite expensive also for the customer. And I'm just curious how Konica Minolta has seen, within its own channel, what kind of resellers have really been excelling in terms of the IT services and MPS delivery.
Yeah, so I personally think it's easier for a managed services company, whether it's a managed print organization or managed IT, but someone who has a managed services mindset to then adopt additional managed services. The ability to have to try to find this balance between, individual consulting with the customer and a productized solution that sort of fits the 80% is where you get the efficiency, right? So it's very expensive if every customer you have to go and consult with and every engagement is unique. So how do you package a bunch of managed services that 80% of it is exactly what the customer needs? And again, when I say customer, it's okay, are we talking a 10-person organization or 50-person organization or a 500-person? And then once you're a trusted advisor, you can bring in any managed services you want. And some of those you can do yourself. I think it'll be, but for very large organizations, it'll be hard to be the jack of all trades, right? So you have to pick 1, 2, 3 things that you think you can provide unique value on. But just being a single provider of item, I think makes anyone in that situation at risk. for someone else to come in and say, well, I can do A plus B plus C. Just look at how we buy things, right? I mean, at our homes now, generally, one provider is giving you multiple different services, right? The mobile companies have come in some areas. In the US, cable companies have come in. And what they used to do 5 years ago is not what they do for us.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing is that more IT decision makers and also line of business are having more influence on buying decisions, are looking for a single supplier. And maybe that kind of links quite nicely to your intelligent connected workplace proposition. Could you just expand on what that covers and how that's operating both in the US and Europe?
Yeah, so it's there's lots of it available on the different websites, depending on what country you're in. But it's this combination of people, spaces, and technology. And I think spaces as a new version, new, maybe means something different now than it did when it was originally designed. But it's this full circle of services and offerings and capabilities that we can bring to a business in terms of anything that they would need. Right. And then how to, as you just said, how to bundle it, how to package that, how to have it be a seamless customer experience. Instead of them having 10 different partners, they can have one partner that can provide, full digital transformation services, full IT service, full managed print services, new services, robotic process automation, these emerging services, security services, video services. So it's this, of that pie chart, if you will, print is this small, one of the smaller pieces in terms of the forward-facing vision. Now, mobilizing all of those capabilities in every country, this is where we go back to our earlier conversation of you really have to be able to leverage knowledge and to achieve any sort of economies of scale, because it would be very expensive, very difficult for each Konica individual country to individually develop all of those competencies.
So what recommendations do you have for traditional MPS providers who are only offering print and want to move into the IT space in terms of what kind of services should they be offering, and what recommendations do you have for them?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it earlier. So there's this very rapid transformation happening on the telecommunications side of the business, in the sense that voice over IP was the original technology, and a lot of that was done on-prem, and now you have cloud-based unified communications services, and every business consumes those in one shape or form or another, right? So it's much like managed print in the sense that everyone's going to print, and it's something that you can partner with someone, and it can be, I think, a win-win in terms of the simplicity of the sale, right? I just think that's a clean one. Next step would be to actually have those conversations with their customers, right? Have a roundtable with their several customers of several, unique cohorts, right? Because if you get, elephant to ant together, it's going to be, you're not going to get the same feedback. So can you get a group of your large customers together and have an honest conversation about areas that they see gap, and then if you get a bunch of smaller customers together, where do they see? And I think from that will come, again, this is a customer-centric view, right? Will come the areas that they would trust that provider to bring new services to them. There's a lot of cloud-based services that can be resold right now. Again, the question is, okay, what value do you provide beyond just reselling, a Microsoft or a Google or something, right? So you have to find those value propositions where you think you can win with your customers.
Yeah, because we tend to see, that there's opportunities around security, as we've discussed, automation, and actually cloud. Although many organizations have, rapidly moved to the cloud to support digital transformation, we're also seeing a lot of cloud complexity that, potentially managed IT service providers can really help their customers actually navigate that journey because of the kind of multi-cloud options that, many organizations may have rushed into. So I think there are still opportunities around cloud and obviously cloud print services. So it's been really interesting to sort of hear, how Konica Minolta is working on IT services. I think it's really been ahead of the game for some time in terms of, making these IT acquisitions as well in this space. And I just wanted to finish off really in terms of asking you, if you have a prediction on what trends you're going to see or we expect to see in the managed IT services space. Is there anything in particular that Konica Minolta is picking out for the coming year?
Yes, we have lots of strategies, lots of activities. I think prediction wise, and just maybe more holistically, while thinking about it, is that we're all living in the middle of a pandemic, right? Hopefully, it's only every 100 years, but in our lifetimes, there's never been anything that's impacted the entire world at the same time in the same manner, and so everyone is experiencing the same situation. And I think we all hoped that it would be over and behind us. But then Delta showed up, and now you have Lambda and Mu and all these. Who knows what's gonna come? So all of this is very disruptive. It's very, I think it's creating unique challenges and unique opportunities. I think every business model is being tested. I think every current approach is being tested, and especially, I think it's the best time to be a startup, because of the chaos and because of the fact that you don't have any of the legacy issues to deal with. You can just start up a new business, and because everyone's working remote, you could talk to any customer anywhere in the world, probably, right? If language wasn't an issue. So to me, there's two big themes emerging. One is, and there's a lot of press on this, people can read about it, but the Great Resignation. And some recent articles I read on it are calling it the Great Reprioritization, which is that it's really people not resigning for the old reasons of promotion or salary or growth, but really for flexibility. They've had time at home. They've seen that, geez, losing 2 hours a day or 10 hours a week is really, not the life I want anymore. And so that's going to put a lot of pressure on all businesses, your listeners and their customers, in terms of, what am I going to do when a bunch of knowledge walks out the door? How am I going to attract new talent? Am I going to tell them they can work from home? Because that's all the job offers are going to say that. Am I going to tell them they have to come in the office? What am I going to tell my current employees? You're going to be in the office full time, or we're going to be hybrid, and any ambiguity there creates opportunities for somewhere between 55 and 95% of employees to be thinking about, where do I want to work, and what do I want to do, and how do I want to do it? Right. So I think this Great Resignation is going to affect all of us. How do we adapt? So survival of the fittest in that regard. And then I think a lot of the questions you were asking were really great questions in terms of what business models are going to emerge from this disruption, from this chaos, in terms of who's going to bring the most value to the customer. You and I had talked previously about who gets to sit at the head of the table with a customer and have that conversation, help that customer make the pick choices and selections for how they're going to spend their money, and what other people at the table that are just there as partners, right? And so I think the person who brings the most value, the person who has the most trusted relationship will be at the head of the table. So for a lot of us who've been in the industry for a long time, it's obvious that all these things are converging. So all of these different models, from managed print services to managed service providers, just different services by different names there, VARs, system integrators, CSPs, telecom companies, all of that is converging into, IP-based technologies and cloud-based technologies. And so the bigger companies are going to be able to bring that full stack, and they're going to figure out how to bundle it and package it almost in like an assurance-like manner, if you will, right, to a customer for a fixed cost. And it'll be hard for other people to sort of, get in, because it'll be a strong package. Again, back to what we talked about, how many things are bought in a package now, right? If you're not going to be able to compete in that area, then I think you have to find what is that niche, what is that, unique marketplace that you can bring more value than a bigger player that has a strong go-to-market. And then the only other option would be partnering. And what's that consortium, if you will, look like, and how strong is it? And can that consortium compete with the provider that will have everything? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not
no.
too scary. To me, as an American entrepreneur, it's incredibly exciting, because disruption brings opportunities.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, I think we've seen, from this crisis over the past 18 months, 2 years, is that, that there's been real sort of evidence of like this whole shift in terms of digital transformation, but also a lot of smaller businesses who have innovated, being able to survive and thrive. And I think it's really interesting, that Great Resignation, because I think that will have a huge impact not only on the print industry in terms of their own employees, but their customers as well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming year. So yeah, thanks for that. But yeah, thanks again for your time, Todd. It's been really interesting to hear about the IT services opportunity. And I think it's really important that, managed print service providers do look at the opportunities around IT services to help them better serve their SMB customers, but also customers in the mid-market space as well. So thanks again for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So thank you for joining this episode of In the Spotlight with Quocirca. For more information, please go to quocirca.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.